everybody. I am so excited to be talking about this project today. And before I fully get started, put some snacks that you want me to talk about in the chat. I'll keep an eye out and I'll pick a snack. But anyway, let's get started. So hello, once again, my name is Cassidy, and I'm going to be talking about a project that I made called SharePair that I made for work, but then it ended up working out and we open sourced it and I started building it for a bunch of different little tools and stuff. So once again, my name is Cassidy. You can find me at Cassidoo, Cassidoo, on most things. And let's get talking about SharePair, shall we? So anyway, SharePair. This is going to be my kind of jank setup for talking about it. I'll give you a bit of a lay of the land of why I built it and where we went from here. So startup pivots are a thing. I'll talk about that in another talk on another day. But my company Contenda, we used to really focus on turning media into text. And so you could upload a YouTube video and it would turn that into a blog post or a tweet thread or something. And the text that was generated was private to the people who generated it, but sometimes they would want to share a draft with someone publicly. We wanted sharing on the platform, but because our API was in development, we didn't have backend resources and we're a really small startup. So we thought, hey, what if we could build a purely front-end solution? And so I started racking my brain and thought of distributed persistent rendering, which we've lightly talked about earlier in the event today. But if you want to read a little bit more about it, you can go to cast.run/DPR. Otherwise, I'll talk about it right now. So in plain English, you can create web pages just on the fly and add it to an existing build with functions. And so you ping a server to create a page, and that page exists for a specified length of time. And we really liked this approach because server-side rendered pages can be vulnerable to DDoSing and other issues. And once again, we really didn't want to touch anything backend related at all because of all the stuff that we were working on at the time. And then there's this concept called on-demand builders that Netlify has, and there's other versions of this on other various platforms, but we used Netlify's on-demand builders, which you can read about at cast.run/ODB. And long story short, you can build pages for a website when a user hits that website for the first time, and then it's cached at the edge, so it becomes a part of the static site. And so we can query that builder function, that on-demand builder function, with authenticated content, and it'll generate a page based on that content. It's a lot of words, but don't worry, we'll continue talking about it. But yeah, long story short, we wanted people to be able to share things publicly without having to share any auth tokens or build like a whole out permission system of sorts. Okay, so DPR, we were going to use it. We also decided to use Astro. I'm not the first person to talk about Astro today, but long story short, it's a really powerful framework for a bunch of different websites, blogs, apps, various things, and it can use a variety of UI libraries with minimal configuration. And what I particularly liked was that it has out-of-the-box support from Markdown to HTML and Netlify's on-demand builders. And so I could kind of plop it all together and hopefully just make an app that worked, which leads me to this beautiful architecture diagram of generally how it works. So this Astro site created SharePair, which is what we're talking about today. So on the authenticated platform side, when I look over here, I'm looking at my slides, or at this diagram. So on the authenticated platform, you have a user who is generating a bunch of content, and they want to share that generated content publicly. And so what they'll do is they'll click a button that takes all that auth content, and it'll pass it to that builder URL, that on-demand builder URL. That on-demand builder URL, which lives in SharePair, accepts a key and the markdown from specific URLs. In our case, it was our platform, and then it builds a page on a share website. And so that share website statically holds the shared pages for a certain amount of cached time. And so as a result, by passing all of this and then building a page from it, it can just exist publicly and then it'll expire after a certain amount of time.
Hey, Cassidy, can you zoom in a little bit? The text is really small.
Of course, yes, I will zoom in and hopefully let me know if you can't read it. Anyway, so in the Astro code, luckily this is kind of pseudocodey, but it's not, it was actually pretty straightforward. So the Astro config this line, the builders is true, is all I needed to do to enable on-demand builders. And for rendering Markdown, there was a page component in Astro where I import Markdown from Astro Remote. And so it was nice to be able to just pass in that Markdown and make it just render on the page. Now, in terms of the auth platform code, what I would do is I was going to be calling a function, which is the generating Markdown. It would get it from our API, and then it would pass that to the on-demand builder function. And so you'd have that Markdown and then a random key. And then that random key is going to be the URL that is then going to be rendering the HTML and then being put on the page. And so then back on the Astro side over here, you parse the Markdown by pulling the Markdown from the request headers. So it's a dynamic route that looks for the Markdown key in the headers of the API request. And that's how you actually populate the page, populate the blog. The random key, again, is just any random URL, the name that we want to name it right now on the platform that I'll show you in a little bit. It's a UUID. You can make it more human reading friendly. You could make it in any regular string, but we just made it so it's randomly generated. So to fully reiterate, you hit a URL in a website that uses DPR, distributed persistent rendering. It generates that page, and then that page exists forever until the cache expires. And so you could go to the share/blog/fart page or whatever. I said fart. It could be anything else. We could say Reese's. I didn't mean to be unprofessional. It's fine. And it'll be there, but the page won't be populated with real content unless you make a proper API request based on what it expects, and it's expecting that Markdown in the headers. All right. That being said, dun, 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 whisper dun, dun, dun to yourself. CORS exists. So because our website isn't truly static right away, but it is later, it's kind of funky because in Netlify, you can set custom headers with a Netlify redirect proxy, or you could set headers directly in Astro, but we aren't building the pages like having a build time for these pages. We're having a function that creates the page and then it's static afterwards. And so what we needed to do was intercept that page before it was actually made, because otherwise we're going to have a bad time. So edge functions. That's what this is for. Edge functions are like serverless functions, and they're written like serverless functions. But what they specifically do is they modify requests and responses at the edge, which I'm not going to define edge right now because that'll take way too much time. But if you want to read more about it, cast.run/edge, and you can see that there. But anyway, long story short, it acts as a middleware to add custom headers to our requests coming in from the authenticated platform. So you have the authenticated platform. You are then clicking that button, making a request. The edge function says, hey, we're going to modify this and make sure that you're allowed to do all of this. And course fun, and then it'll pass everything to the site and generate a page. And so that's how the edge function works. And the code is a little bit funky, but I think it's worth talking about, so I'm going to walk through it a little bit. So it looks like a serverless function, but it's really just updating requests and response things. And so this first part, the request method, is options. We need to include this options request to handle CORS from requests inside the browser, because preflight, which you can look up preflight if you want, it's very annoying, but it checks to see if CORS is understood and that a server is aware that this is going to happen. And so we wanted to make sure that it will accept this Markdown header that's coming our way. The next part, it allows requests from anywhere. That's what that asterisk means. It could be from any URL. In the actual SharePair repo that we integrated into our platform, we just have a regex for the URLs that can go there. If you were ever to use it, you could make a regex so it only comes from your side, but you can make it come from anywhere if you wanted. The next part allows our custom Markdown header that we, again, is now allowed because of that if statement. It allows our custom Markdown header that the Astro site consumes. And then this last part, it caches the generated pages for 30 days. So you have all of these chunks, and this is basically just saying, yes, CORS, stop it. I'm here to save the day. And then it saved the day. So anyway, now that we have all of this done, that's SharePair. And I've been doing a lot of talking about how it works in theory, but there's real things that I can actually show you, which ends up being a lot more interesting. So I mentioned startup pivoting before. We no longer do the, hey, we'll turn your talk into text. We ended up building an app on top of our API called Brainstory. And Brainstory is an app that helps you talk through your ideas and share them with people. And sharing is pairing. So we just integrated SharePair into the platform so I could share a link with you. So I'm going to do a quick demo of how it works in prod, and then we will do some live coding as well. So I asked everybody to talk about snacks. I think the main one that I remember is Reese's. Oh, and dried cherries. Okay, cool. Oh, what a combo. So I'm just gonna create a new idea about Reese's and cherries, and it should be fun. So in here, you just say, what would you like to brainstorm? I would like to brainstorm how I would like to communicate my love for Reese's and dried cherries. I think they're such great snacks, and also goldfish. It adds a nice little salty mix to all of it. And so this is just how Brainstorm works. You kind of talk with it and then it responds back to you. And so you kind of go back and forth. My team is in the chat and they're just like, oh my gosh, you're doing this in prod? It's fine. So yeah, sounds delicious. Let's dive in. What particular aspects of Reese's dried cherries and goldfish make them your favorite snacks? I like that I could put all of these on one plate and eat them together. And though it would be weird, it would be a really nice cohesive treat. So you got to do a couple conversations until this end session button hits, so that way it knows it has enough information to talk about. The taste experience is delectable, delightful, and zany. I'm going to stop there. You get it. Okay, so I'm going to hit end session, and then what it does after that is it's going to summarize the idea. And this is the kind of thing that I would then share with people. And so you can use it to plan like blog posts, conference talks, various things like that. So this is where I integrated SharePair. So you can kind of see this is the treat. This is look zany, delightful, delectable, all that jazz. When I click share, there's two options. There's the feedback sharing, which this one doesn't use SharedPair. This actually like has someone authenticate into the platform and give feedback. But then there's the read-only sharing, which uses SharePair. So when I click a read-only share link, oh my gosh, thank goodness it worked. Now I have a link where if I go to it, oh my gosh, it's a blog. I'm actually just going to paste it in the chat and you'll be able to see it right then and there. And that's our snacks. So anyway, that's how SharePair works, where now anybody can look at this post right here and the page will exist for, I think 30 days is the cache time that I have in here. So we should do some live coding now. So SharePair is an open source repo, which I'm going to paste the link to that in the chat as well. And I'm noticing the time difference between my chat and my speaking in the chat. It's fine. You'll be prepared. So the GitHub repo for this, you can use it as a template right here. And I also have instructions in the README for how to adapt it for yourself. And so I did that for the jam. And so I have the jam.dev SharePair where all I did was change the colors and the logo. And so now we have our own SharePair instance for the jam.dev. And so what we need to do is we need to create some kind of app, some kind of page that will query this SharePair and it'll generate blog posts for us. Sounds good? Okay. So I'm going to pull up my IDE and let's go for it. We're going to do just some plain HTML, CSS, and JavaScript because why do anything else? So we're going to do a little just SharePair example. And then I have a little shortcut in here. I'm going to plop in my inputs. And so I have an input for a share slug because I don't want to randomly generate something right now. A share slug where that'll be the URL that we go to. And then we have our input text will be just all of the markdown that we want on the page. And then when we have a function share and print, which I haven't written that yet, but I'll just do function share and print. then that is going to be our function that calls share pair and then outputs it to the page. Okay, I'm going to save this, and I'm also going to run a little thing so that way we can actually see if it's loading. That would be nice. So we're not doing this totally blind. Ah, yay, share pair. Okay, it's not that cute. I'm going to add a few lines of CSS because I want things to be at least a little bit pretty. Okay, just adding some spacing, some stuff in there. And then I should have planned my window placement better, where you don't have any hot module reloading because we're going a little hardcore here, but that's okay. All right, so now what we want to do is be able to write Markdown in here and then pass it to our share pair instance. So we have to fill out our script in here, and we have an assumption that we want to call an API, take that slug, and then display it on the page. So in this API thing, I'm going to say like let share slug equal, and then look at that. Copilot, you're my friend. Okay, so we're going to get the share slug, and then we're going to have a share string. We're not going to get that input text yet, but we're going to say let string equal, and then I'm just going to do this for now. So from here, I'm going to call a function share that we will be passing in, share slug right here, dot then, and then inside of here is where we're going to display everything on the page. Oh my gosh. Okay. Sometimes Copilot is a little aggressive, but I do appreciate the effort. So I'm going to have dot, a little bit of data, and then we're going to do document dot get element by ID output. Okay. Thank you. And I'm also going to make the string is actually going to be a template string, which I'm saving right here because I have our URL for share pair saved. Okay, cool. So this is just the Jam share pair web app that I just showed /blog, and then the slug that we are passing in. Okay, cool. So we have that. Now we have to actually create our share function, and that share function is calling the API. And guess what? I pre-wrote it because I don't trust myself. So in this share slug right here, or in this share right here, we pass in the share slug, and then we take the markdown from that input. So when we take the markdown from that input, we do encode URI component. And what that does is it encodes all of that markdown into something that we can pass into a URL. And then from there, I did a little error checking. Look at that, so secure. We fetch the Jam share pair page, and because we're fetching it and hitting it with a GET request, and also edge functions can only. Sorry, I'm hearing my voice now. My page refreshed. Sorry about that. Don't like hearing my own voice. When you hit an edge function, it can only take these get methods. So we do this get, and then when you use distributed persistent rendering, DPR, I mentioned before, the first user to a page is the one that generates that page. So by hitting this page with this get request, we are the first user on that page, and then anybody else who goes to that page now just sees what we generated. And so our headers, which we allowed in that CORS code, was the application JSON and then markdown. And so the markdown is that encoded URI component. Whew, okay. So we've passed our headers, we've passed in our slug, and now we call share and I should probably have some error checking in here. I'm just going to copy this, actually. It'll be fine. If it's not, I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm just gonna do that. And actually, we don't want string. We want or data. We want string. So now, in theory, this will work. And if it doesn't, I'm really sorry. Okay, we're going to call this delightful treat. And then what were some other snacks that people talked about? I saw a lot of just peanut butter cups. Everyone likes these, unless you're allergic. And the whole reason why I'm actually writing a lot of stuff here instead of just a lorem ipsum is because I want to show this can take list. And then it can also even take code. So console.log, hello everyone, like that. Okay, so anyway, you do all this, you call share pair. Oh my gosh, let's see if it works. We're going to, you know what? I'm going to paste it in the chat. Let's see what happens. It worked. Everyone, share pair. How about that? So now anybody can go to jam, share, pair, Netlify app /blog/delightful treat, and they will see this. And now, and this was just like, oh, I had this page accept any localhost things. You could have followed along and done this. But now we can generate whatever pages we like and it'll just work. If I ever go to this page and it's just a random URL, blah, 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 it just has a no content found. Or if you ever just go to the home page of this, it'll just say, welcome to SharePair, and that's it. But whenever you go to a URL that actually is something, and it's not just this, what did we call it? Delightful treat? Delightful treat. It will be our page. And it also says when the page was generated. And so this one says that it was at 46 minutes after. It's 47 minutes after, not server rendered. It's statically rendered. So anyway, that is how SharePair works. If you would like to try it out, once again, we have this GitHub repo here, and then you can also, again, see it live on our app Brain Story. And that is what I wanted to pair with you. Thank you so much for your time today.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Cassidy. I'm like, oh, how there are so many ways I feel like I could make use of this sort of pattern. And I have a ton of questions, but I want to give the audience a chance to ask questions. If you have questions out there in the audience, drop them in the Q&A section. There's a button on the right side of your screen. We do have one, maybe two. We'll start here. Okay. Let's see. It's the first one says, what's the one thing people should get right about SharePair and the one thing people should not get wrong with SharePair?
Oh, goodness.
The inverse.
Really, so if you're going to take it from the open source repo, make sure your regex is right for which allowed URLs you accept, because you don't want someone to just kind of spam your page with hits and then your functions get called tons and tons of times. And I think if you want to build something like this from scratch, please learn from me and my core's pain. I talked kind of briefly about like what the edge function does to handle like the options requests and all the pre-flight and all of those things. That took so long, and cores is not fun. So if you'd like to try it out, please learn from me and my pain, but also, yeah, that's definitely the things you want to mess around with. And it should be, in theory, pretty easy to get set up on your own with the styling and everything, with the instructions in the README.
That's great. And I totally commiserate with you on the course thing. I feel like I have so many examples of like spend hours on this thing and it works locally. And I'm a genius. I solved this locally. And then I go to deploy it and it's like, no, it doesn't work.
It was painful. But the thing is, what's nice about it is because it doesn't touch the back end at all, you really can integrate it pretty quickly into a front end app where it was, again, I mentioned before, it was on my company's old app. I actually added it to Brain Story yesterday, and it was pretty quick to be able to just say like, okay, when I hit this button, it should call this API and this is what the URL will be. And it kind of just works because you always know what your SharePair URL will be, and you will have your slug on your authenticated side. So it's just appending the two and calling it.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, another audience question here. Let's see. It says, very cool. After hearing the name SharePair, I instantly thought of pairing that's done during the onboarding process. What do you see is the future of SharePair?
I don't know. I kind of like the idea of SharePair as a service, because I think that this is something that a lot of people have to deal with when it comes to building something that is shareable, but you have to deal with auth, and dealing with authentication is hard. And so I do think it would be cool to do that, but at the same time, I kind of like that it's open source and people can do with it what they will.
Yes, yes. I totally agree because you've kind of built this base and people can take it and apply it and add what they want to it. And
Yeah.
so on that, I feel like I have a few questions that are yeah on really in that vein of extending it, but I wanted to take a step back. It may have been a joke, but James earlier in the chat said no one understands the edge, and he got a couple thumbs
Yeah.
up. And I know it's a fairly abstract concept, and that would be a huge question to ask you. What is the edge? But if you had to explain what the edge and what you're doing with edge functions in a paragraph or so, how would you start to explain it?
I Edge functions are serverless functions, kind of, but that works for the metaphor. They're functions that intercept your requests. And they're functions that when people say at the edge, it just means close to you. But I don't know if the close to you part really matters in a case like this. It's a something that can intercept a request. And in this particular case, it was actually really hard to figure out examples to see if this was even possible. I literally sketched this out and I was like, this would be cool. Can you do this? Because there's not a lot of examples of on-demand builders or edge functions out there, but you can, and you just have to think of edge functions as intercepting your requests, and sometimes intercepting requests means dealing with cores. Good luck.
Yes, yes, definitely. So can you think of other, because there aren't a ton of examples, can you think of other, I mean, practical use cases for edge functions and or on-demand builders?
Yeah, and so I do think on the on-demand builders front, it's so nice to be able to create pages that are dynamically added to a build that aren't server-side rendered. Because it's just so fast to be able to have a page that exists. And like, yes, for the first person, it's technically slower because the page is generated by the functions in question. So it's like kind of server-side rendered, but not really. That being said, I think that's super valuable for large build sizes where let's just say you have a blog that has like, let's just say you love writing and you have thousands and thousands and thousands of posts. If you write a new blog and add it to your build, it's going to take a while for your blog to build and for that page to actually be online. It's not the end of the world, but it is something that happens. And especially for like e-commerce sites, for example, with sometimes millions of products, it takes a long time for a site to build. But with something like on-demand builders, you could say like, okay, all of these are actually in a builder function. The first person to pick Reese's from the list of pages, that page is a little bit slow for them, but everybody else, it's just statically made. And your build times are really, really short, but the pages exist on demand. Um, and so for on-demand builders, that is probably the best case I can think of where it's just really large build sizes. It reduces it while still maintaining like the atomic deploys concept in Jamstack building. But then also for edge functions, geolocation is really nice, where a good example of it was in an election year at Netlify, they said, hey, you seem to be in this area. This is where your voting locations are, or this is where you have to register to vote, something like that. And that was pretty cool to be able to see that. But also just kind of transforming responses. I feel like that could be really valuable for internationalization to do it at that edge point rather than re-rendering every single page on a server or creating a whole separate build for a different translated page.
And really cool that you can do it for just one little corner of your application, especially if
Right.
the rest is
It doesn't have
pre-rendered.
to take over.
And I this adds a little bit of complexity, but building on the example you gave with the blogger e-commerce, I've also seen folks with where they have a highly trafficked site where let's say they know their top 10 or 50 pages or blog posts or products that are like always being hit, and they don't want to slow down for that first hit, that they might pre-render those and then the
Mhm.
archive stuff for the less
Exactly.
popular
You
stuff.
can you can prioritize pages. And also just
Mhm.
as you like look at your logs and see how pages are being built, you can probably prioritize things better where you're just like, wow, nobody ever goes to these pages. Maybe should they even exist at all? And there's a lot of interesting telemetry and metrics that you can pull from that.
Is there anything you have to consider from um, maybe like an analytics perspective or a consistency perspective if you're going to pre-render some content and use edge functions to generate other content?
Not really. Once again, it does end up being static in the end. Like when the page is first made, it's technically server rendered, but once the page exists, you can use any libraries that you would normally use. Like if you use, for example, something like Fathom Analytics, just have it in like the generated head tag, and then it'll just know that that page was hit. And so
Mm,
luckily that part doesn't seem concerning, at least in my experience with it. I can't think of any bad cases. Knock on
yes,
wood.
very simple in theory, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
everything always is.
Right, that's right. So, and you talked quite a bit about caching, and I know it's kind of like the core of
Mm,
I don't know
pain.
how this becomes really really effective. And in your example, I think you had said, well, you just put an expiration date on it so that URL is going to live for 30 days or
Yeah.
so. Is that really the only, do you have to make a time-based value when you are providing a response, like an expiration date, or can you use other, like if you're using Netlify and you rebuild the site, does it also break the cache? Just wondering, are there other mechanisms for consideration when you're thinking through that caching logic?
Yes. And I admit I kept it as rudimentary as possible because I don't like dealing with caching. So in this particular case, it refreshes every 30 days or whenever I rebuild the site, which is not often, but it is a thing. Um, in an ideal world, you just don't rebuild the site too often, and people aren't sharing too often in this particular case. You don't have to set an expiration date. It could just live forever on that static build, um, to a point. I think that comes down to limitations by your provider, though.
Right. So if would you do that? Would you rely on the provider if you wanted something to persist after you had created it in the way you did, or would you take a next step, like bring in a backend service to cache that or write it back to a repo or something? Like, what would be the next step that you would take if you wanted to persist that content?
Yeah, I probably would bring in some kind of backend service so I'm not at the mercy of a provider because lock-in is not good. Um, or you just regenerate the page where it's just like, oh, this figure out a way where you can say like this page was generated before, but it expired. Should it be the same content as it was before, or is it just a 404 now and you have to go back to the original content and share it again? With ours, we try to communicate like in the brain story example, we communicate like this is a temporary read-only share link. If you want to persist it more, use like the proper authenticated share link, and that's just how we worked around that.
Okay, okay, that's interesting. Interesting. So Astro has come up a few times, and
Yeah.
we're going to hear about it again in some presentations tomorrow. And so I thought it might be good to let's end on talking about Astro. So what we're hearing a lot more about it in the last year or so, and I've seen some other examples that you've done in the last few months around using Astro. So what are the things that have brought you to Astro and really compel you to keep coming back to it?
Yeah, I think the main thing is really just that it's very framework agnostic or rather library agnostic, but I can add in more as needed. Where I've mentioned Brainstory before, not to be a shill, Brainstory is fully built on Astro and it's very app-like. It's not a website. And I think that is kind of what's cool about it. You can have very like this is the marketing website type experiences or very app-like experiences, however you want to build it. And so we built it with Astro and React, and it's nice to not have to set up a router. It just kind of works with the page-based routes and everything, which a lot of frameworks do that. And in particular for me, I like that Astro kind of feels like a return to old school development, but with some of the nice improvements that we've gotten over the years.
Yes, I would answer that the same way. I felt like 2 years ago or so, it felt like Next was really my only choice if I didn't really know what the site was going to grow into, and I didn't want
Right.
to
Set up a
re-platform the thing.
giant routes page or file or something. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so you have that now with Astro, I feel like you've got that the time to hello world is really small. You can just
Mm,
make a single static page site and it still feels like it's an okay tool to use for that because like you said, you're back
right.
to the basics. But that server side rendering and the power and then adding edge functions from your service provider, like you can also scale it into this massive application at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely like doing as little server-side rendering as possible. And so the fact that I can do some, but not all, I can do like the builder's functions route. I can just have a fully static site. I could really just write HTML and CSS and then have something generated in a function and it'll all work. It's really nice to work with. I've been really happy with it.
Yes, awesome, awesome. Well, let's end actually one more question because you took your snack examples from the audience. So I have to ask you then, what is the best snack?
Oh, the best snack? Oh no. I do have a pile of chocolates right here that I was stress eating before this. Um, but if I were to like go to the movies or something and just have like a snack that I can munch on, probably Chex Mix for me. I like the variety and the flavor.
Which flavor of Chex Mix?
I like the classics, but the bold ones are really good too. Like the pumpernickel chips in those. Mm.
Yes, yes, love that. I love it. I particularly like that because nobody else in my house likes them. So if I buy them, I get the whole bag to myself
That's
too. I
amazing.
don't know why either, and I will eat
Yeah,
them
it's
in
so
one.
good. I don't understand them, but good for you.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you very much, Cassidy. This was a great Q&A session, great presentation, so much to think about, so much inspiration here. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for having me.